What is the Roaring Night doing? No, really, why are we tractor beaming a middle-aged mother of two while she's asleep? Not even just that, why are they not really around for chapter 1 and 2? What is any of the point behind the kidnapping pivot disaster in chapter 3? And then most of chapter 4 just ends up as pointless aura farming until the night creates a fountain in the dark world, which they could have already done ages ago. Like, if you look at all of their actions together, it doesn't entirely add up to a sensible motive or goal. Maybe if I take everything the night does, or is implied to do, put it on a timeline and look real hard, we can somehow make sense of the whole plan. So once again, I'm going to take a seemingly simple series of occurrences in Deltarune that nobody ever questioned for a second, and run all of that through a blender of nitpicky distinctions and logical fallacies. Hopefully coming out the other end with a potentially plausible explanation absolutely nobody asked for. And the reason I'm doing that is because I believe in Deltarune's writing that much. Toby has shown in Undertale and the existing Deltarune chapters that he can write characters that feel real and genuine, while also telling a story that is detail-oriented, natural, and has intriguing setups combined with exciting payoffs. Not to forget all of the clever subversions and head-turners it throws at you. Deltarune continuously astonished me during scenes like chapter 3's ending in front of the bunker. It is able to portray Susie's confused desperation that reflects our own feelings about the night situation, while also showing her unwavering resolve to eventually figure it out, and still recognize that at this point in time there's nothing else to do but take a break. It's such a great sombering scene after all the action before it, and still crams so much information into just a few text boxes. Half of them being a bunch of ellipses, and that's not a critique, to be clear. Those ellipses and Susie repeatedly looking for reassurance actually do a lot of the heavy lifting in conveying those feelings. And this is far from a one-off. Not every scene is as dense and emotional as that, of course, but dialogue and really any detail shown in Deltarune never feels utilitarian in a way that is off-putting. At the same time, they always manage to add to the story and provide interesting information. Look, Toby Fox is the sole writer of the story, working backwards from his dream ending that he had like 15 years ago. Yeah, there will be some tiny logical slip-ups because he's only one little dog, but there's not gonna be a Vic the Vacuum cleanup product placement or plotline about respecting your elders to appease the shareholders. Deltarune also isn't an open world or even a 3D game where objects just kinda get placed to fill out the world and support aesthetics. Quite the opposite even. Narratively, it works more like a book that gets visual and of course mechanical support from its existence as a video game. You remember those choose-your-own-adventure books where they make you turn to a certain page based on your choice? It's kinda like that, except the story isn't a massive railroaded disappointment. What I mean by that is that the story-first approach lets Toby and his team be extremely intentional in what to add into the game. If a sprite or any kind of art doesn't inform the world, has a purpose in the plot, or is really funny, there is no point in adding it. Especially for the night plotline, which is the central thread of the narrative, it'd be crazy if it wasn't fully thought out and scrutinized all the way through. That's not to say I have the definitive explanation, but rather that there will be one and I wanna try to find it. So frick you, I'm not looking too far into it. Toby did actually think all of that, and it is in fact that deep. That's why Deltarune is such an intriguing game and why you're sitting here listening to me talk in the first place. With the literary comprehension awareness PSA out of the way, we can finally get to talking about the Roaring Night. For once I won't be skipping over all the basic facts, quite the opposite even. Let's start by constructing the most exhaustive timeline possible of everything the night has been involved in. Here's how this is gonna work. First of all, I'm just gonna figure out what happened. No judgment, no big theories, only cold, hard facts. And a surprising amount of architecture. All events are going to be placed on the timeline either as major points of interest or smaller side events for when the night is only mentioned or does something less consequential. After that, we'll get into the deeper implications, character motivations, all that good stuff. This 7-year-old shadow abomination still writes fiction the old-fashioned way. Yeah, unless explicitly shown otherwise, we can make a safe assumption the night made all other dark worlds. Since chapter 3 there's no other culprits and we don't have to make the plot more complicated than it already is. That of course includes the first dark world in the old classroom. And I'm gonna have to cut the cold hard fact gathering for tangent already, because we don't enter the old classroom. We enter the closet, which has its own dark world, Castletown, the place where we meet Razzie. Of course there is a door between the two rooms, and actually, how big is the supply closet? I know the darkness is kind of artificially inflating it, but without that, what does it actually look like? I would have imagined a 2x2 meter area with a bunch of shelves, but a connecting door for a supply closet is a really weird choice. Like the kind of closet that wouldn't even have a permanent light fixture. Okay, let's say it's more room sized, like half of the old classroom. That would fit right in if we assume the ominous chair room on the left is the same size as the other classrooms. Would also mean that it has some kind of light bulb. It's a school after all. It might lead a lot of stuff. I know I'm a little fixated on this light bulb shit, but trust me, it kinda matters. So when the fountain was created, it enveloped both rooms. That's not uncommon. The first sanctuary in chapter 4 envelops 3 different rooms, and the chapter 3 Dark World could arguably span the entire house. The only difference here is the door translating much more directly to the Dark World as this large gate. I would guess that's because the closet is thematically a more different room than the old classroom. In the other examples, the rooms thematically fit together enough to not need that separation. Castletown does have its own fountain though, doesn't it? There's no way it just got created when the knight opened the old classroom fountain. It must be special in some way. Maybe the extended periods of darkness and high amount of stored items makes closets and storage rooms more susceptible to being dark worlds. But surely the storage closet is used every now and then. So the creation of the dark world nearby must have at least activated it. I'll put a pin in that whole storage business for later. For now, all we need to know is that the knight created the old classroom fountain, and it led to the creation of the Castletown somehow. That wasn't too bad, right? Next up, who closed the door behind Susie and Chris? This one's kinda inconsequential, like yeah, it could easily be the knight successfully tricking the two into the closet with a mischievous grin on their face, but it could also have been Toriel walking by seeing an open door. Wouldn't make that much of a difference. In the interest of this whole video, I might as well attribute it to the knight. Sharm later on mentions the knights and describes how they locked away 3 kings to put the remaining Spade King into power. Practically, this most likely translates to the knight moving around pieces in the old classroom, preparing the room for whatever their plan is. We can see Chris doing something similar for their Dark World. They prepare the TV much earlier, and right before opening it, they leave the house door ajar and turn on the TV. Actually, that does imply electronics have to be turned on to exist in the Dark World. Tanner was clearly part of the plan in chapter 3. I don't know what to do with that information, but there you go. We also know that the knight never directly met King, he was only told of them by Jevil. And that's pretty much it for chapter 1. Did the knight once again create this fountain? Probably. Were they hiding in the closet? Probably. Was the internet outage caused by the knight or their affiliates? Probably. Was the knight specifically targeting Birdley and Noel? Probably yes. Look, there's a lot of maybes here and I'm not gonna answer any of them. Yet. It's all very dependent on character motivation at this point, so we'll keep that for the next section. What we can say for sure is that the Dark Fountain was created while Birdley and Noel were in the computer room, and they didn't notice. The computer room was likely also tampered with before the creation of the fountain. The laptop was turned on and positioned to see the creation of the fountain at the very least. Most importantly, Queen springs this determination-related exposition dump on us kinda out of nowhere. Where did she learn about that? The only place I can imagine is from the knight before the creation of the fountain. Queen probably inferred it from the knight's actions shown in the video, or maybe they softly whispered it into the laptop's USB port. Doesn't really matter, what counts is that the knowledge of determination was very intentionally put onto Queen. And that's it for chapter 2. The knight again just set everything up to happen a certain way and then stayed in the background. Or rather so far ahead of us that we couldn't catch up to them in any way. Chapter 3 takes its time on having the knight show up, but that doesn't mean they don't influence the narrative early on. Chris creating the fountain was definitely planned, potentially due to their easy access to the Dreamer residence, or because the knight couldn't be there at the time. After all, the knight being late is a big plot point throughout the chapter. Specifically, the fact that they were being expected much earlier lets us conclude that the plan was for the knight to arrive by a certain time, but they ended up getting delayed for some reason. At the very least, the part of the plan that Tanner was included in didn't quite turn out how it was supposed to, bringing us to the actual confrontation. This one's pretty straightforward. The knight tries his funny little tractor beam thing, Susie interrupts them, basically forcing a fight, then we get our ass beat, at least on the first playthrough. If we do decide to lock on with the help of G-Man, there's no immediate consequences for the narrative, so it kinda doesn't matter. This is not the video to start splitting timelines and invent quantum plots based on one single decision. Neither the weird route nor obtaining all of the shadow crystals have introduced major differences in the story so far. So we'll take all of that stuff and push it somewhere else. At least until the new chapters come out and pay off all of the secret hunting. Either way, after the little clash, Undyne shows up and in what I would describe as at least an unprepared reaction, the knight pivots into kidnapping her instead of Toriel. We then exit the dark world, showing that the knight can at least exist in the light world at night, and follow them to the bunker, showing that the knight has access to the bunker, and we don't. Which is how we learn about this little guy, the bunker security locking mechanism. I've been racking my brain about what this actually is, and especially how exactly that panel looks like. 3 separate entry fields are already very unorthodox, and it certainly doesn't quite line up with the pixel art we see of it. Before that though, I want to figure out how it even works, as in how many codes are needed to open the door. Just 1 because the Night Gang has access while only one of their members is a code holder? Maybe 2 people, which is why the mayor and Undyne went to the bunker together. Or 3 because there's 3 entry fields, otherwise you just need 1 entry field and 3 valid codes to input. Also just works best from a writing perspective, having to collect them on some Dragon Ball type shit. All 3 codes being necessary instinctively seems like the most sensible option, but then we do have to ask the question of how the Night Gang accesses the bunker. The knight is able to get in through the bunker door, and it opens for Chris as well at the very end. So they either have the other 2 codes, or there's someone inside opening the door for them. The slowed down gas noises that we hear near the bunker also appear in the Holiday residence basement. That could mean they have an alternative entrance to it, which the knight didn't want to use while being chased for obvious reasons. It also isn't quite clear whether Chris is having the door open for them or if they input the code themselves. We get these little ellipses at the end, sometimes indicating an action, but there's no sound or animation for it, which I would expect in a scene as pivotal as this. Tricky Tony certainly doesn't mislead people much as is being said, but he sure loves keeping things intentionally vague when he wants to hide later story beats. Or I'm reading way too much into 3 little dots, I don't know. Okay, that didn't actually help at all with figuring out what the panel looks like. Let's just focus on the text and the sprite art. The description mentions 3 entry fields. The actual one has 1.5 maybe. 1 number pad with just 9 buttons, and then whatever this stuff on the bottom left is. So if we were to model a panel after this sprite art that still accounts for 3 different codes, it would look something like this. The 3 buttons on the bottom left represent whose code is being input, with the field above them showing the selected logo, and the numpad lets you input the numbers which are being shown on the big entry field above. Something like that would align more with only 1 code being needed for access, and narratively that's still very possible. If we strictly adhere to the text description, which I would say holds more weight than the visuals in Deltarune, it might end up looking more like this. 3 entry fields with the symbols beside them, and then a number pad to obviously let you enter the code. Functionally, this kinda sucks ass, so maybe there'll be more buttons bottom left to let you choose which entry field you want to use. Okay, that's great. I don't think this segment helped much, but I honestly just really wanted to draw out the bunker lock. Based on how Susie's approaching the codes, we will need all 3, but she also clearly doesn't entirely know how it works. Either way, that's all there is for chapter 3. Notably, this is the one chapter where the fun gang isn't lagging behind the knight. Usually they are on the back foot the entire time, but here the Lancer fan club catches the knight off guard and is able to force a confrontation. Chapter 4's disembodied adventure through the Holiday Mansion doesn't have any knight involvement, but it does let us draw connections between the knight, Carol, and Chris. Something I've already been presenting as a fact for the sake of keeping the timeline in order. First of all, Carol is on the phone for sure. She says she's arriving, a few minutes later someone is at the door, there she is. Boom. Through that phone call, she then gets implicated in that whole Dogwood conspiracy, and of course by being Des's mother. Honestly, we don't really have a hard fact that establishes the Night Gang as a trio, but they all hold each other up in this implicative triangle by being connected to each other, with the Knight obviously sitting at the center of it all. While we're on the phone thing, the speech bubble just represents the phone being on speaker, and the soul being too far away to understand everything properly. It's nothing else, there's no different person in the Weird Rod ending. Carol is just properly audible this time. Also, I think the red voice in the phone call could be somebody else. They're on a completely different topic and, well, the text is a different color. It could be the knight, it could still just be Carol. We can't glean much identifiable information from these little sentence snippets anyways, so there's no real point in arguing about it. Next up is the church's dark fountain, which was made when Toriel's choir practice was supposed to happen. But of course all of that got thrown out the window when the high cortisol fountain chuds got positively rain-mocked by Toriel cancel maxing on practice this time around. God, I hope this is still funny by the time this video comes out. Once the fuck squad are in the dark world, the knight seemingly doesn't do much. Early on they cut us off from getting to the fountain, which I'd say is pretty significant already, and then fuck off behind the big door in Gerson's study. Once we make it through there at the end of the first sanctuary, the knight goes right back to lobbing swords at us, and then fucks off behind a different door. We figure out how to open the door, make it to the end of the third sanctuary, and wouldn't you know it, the knight is throwing swords at the Lancer gang again. After plot armoring our way through all that, the fun squad finally ends up confronting the knight. Well, not really. The knight ends up creating a fountain in the Dark World, summoning a titan, and then quietly make an exit while the fuck Lancer Club is busy taking care of the world-ending entity of darkness. After closing the fountain, Chris is suspiciously hesitant to open a closet in the church. That could mean the knight is still in there, but they really could have left any other direction. There's definitely something significant in there, but it'd be stupid for the knight to get themselves stuck in the closet with all the time they had. And that's everything the knight has done in Deltarune so far, as straightforward as I can make it. If you just wanted a little recap on everything the knight is up to in anticipation for chapter 5, then this is where you can click the little X on the tab and go back to doomscrolling. The knight opened some fountains, kidnapped Undyne, and then summoned a titan in the church. But it really isn't that straightforward, is it? The knight isn't only an evil person with an evil plan and we're the good guys with the good guy plan that saves the world. Undertale wasn't that simple, and even Deltarune's smaller arcs that place the chapter bosses as antagonists are much more complicated than that. So here's where I hit you with the recontextualization. Welcome to the knight is fucking stupid theory. Okay, that's a little far maybe, but the idea here is that the Night Gang doesn't really have a full picture of this whole Dark World situation either. They have some kind of destination to arrive at, but everything in between is them testing and figuring out how to make use of Dark Worlds under the direction of probably Carol to achieve their specific goal. The Night looks like they're just fucking around sometimes, because, well, they literally are just fucking around and finding out. Let me go back to the timeline and actually explain myself so that along the way we can figure out a more concrete explanation for what the fuck is going on. Alright, here's how this is gonna work. I just figured out the what and where for every night appearance. So with the added context I can get to the when, why and how of every major point of interest. Let's get started with the creation of the first Dark Fountain.
When?
It happened at some point before school started. No clue when exactly, because, well, we were just a digital baby in the digital womb at that point. Okay, that got weird fast. Point is, we weren't there for it, so there's no other occurrences to put the fountain creation in context with.
Why?
So we kind of deciphered that Dark Worlds dormantly exist in continuously dark places, the school closet and the bunker being the two major examples. Also, Chapter 2's and 4's closets kind of allude to the Knight's involvement, essentially closed off areas that get no sun or moonlight and are used so rarely that even their manual lamps don't get used much. That's why we arrive in this wasteland upon entering the closet, and at the same time why Castletown can harbor any darkness. It is concentrated, deep darkness akin to the bottom of the ocean. Contrary to other Dark Worlds which leave enough light to let your imagination create something, here the world is blank and only the building blocks of existence are left. Even if there was stuff in the closet, it wouldn't be able to reflect on this Dark World. I'm guessing the bunker and potentially those closets around other Dark Worlds operate under similar circumstances. I'm not sure what's up with this place at the start of chapter 3 exactly. It's kind of closety, but there's actual darkness around, like the couch, the camera and these carpet polyps. At least I think that's what they are. But then we also have the deep darkness staples like ice, inflatable wacky wobbly balls, the glass, and you know, the darkness itself. It seems to be some kind of hybrid area, which I think is what Tanner means when he mentions the purple cliffs. The soundtrack for chapter 1's area is also called Cliffs, so this must be the general name of these areas. All of that and the way they're placed on the far sides of each Dark World places them as some sort of border area where the light fades into deep darkness that gives no more space for imagination. But who knows at this point, there's only 2 examples right now and they are wildly inconsistent between each other. Which begs the question whether the closet or the bunker are even traditional Dark Worlds in the first place. Or some level 2 Dark World that's extra powerful. Castletown is already special on account of being able to harbor every kind of darkness. I can imagine the bunker operating under similar circumstances. What that means is that the old classroom fountain probably was the first normal Dark World created by the Knight during our existence in Deltarune. You don't just learn about some crazy world transforming magic and go, yep, that makes sense, let's go retrieve my daughter from the infinite nothingness. No, when you learn about stabbing a knife into the ground leading to some cool shit, you go to try it out somewhere. That's what's happening here. The Night Gang is testing out Dark World creation and how to affect them by manipulating objects in the Light World. That just leaves us with one more question. Was the activation of Castletown's Dark World intended, or is Rousey's entire existence one colossal mistake? For one, the door to the closet is open when we get there, so it's not like the knight didn't see the closet. Although it probably just looked like a basic-ass storage room at that point. Coming from the bunker, it's likely that they do understand this concept of dark rooms being inherent dark worlds. Lancer shows up extremely early in the dark world, indicating that he could have been placed in the closet on purpose as one of the playing cards belonging to the deck in the old classroom. But there's also this dialogue from Rousey that could prove the opposite, although if you wanted to be nitpicky, it only proves that he knew about the Great Door beforehand, but not the fact that it had been opened. Lancer could have sprinted right into Castletown after the fountain creation, but realistically he would have had to be rather close to the door. Either way, it's most likely that creating Castletown was part of the Knight's plan, which brings us back to the age-old question of, what the fuck is your endgame, Rousey? Since chapter 4 we can kind of sort our main cast by their motivations, but Rousey is still floating somewhere in the middle. Especially if the Night Gang brought him into existence on purpose, I still can't properly place his plan and alignment with anybody. Sure, you're helping close the dark fountains and want to avoid the roaring, but it's still unclear where exactly you came from and how you know all of that video game stuff. I don't know, I don't think Rousey is evil, but he's also clearly got his own agenda that differs from both Susie's goal and ours as the Soul. Really simple this time around. The Knight went into the old classroom, potentially very early before school began, and started preparing the room. Moving playing cards around, opening the connection closet door, and then determinedly stabbing the ground, or rather the carpeted floor of the classroom to create a dark fountain. The creation of the second fountain was already a theory goldmine before chapter 3 and 4, and I'm afraid having a better idea of the Knight's identity isn't helping us too much. This one's a pretty tight window actually, and the linchpin for figuring out this entire series of events is that Birdley and Noelle did not notice anything Dark Fountain related at all. They thought they fell asleep and had a dream. So right away the fountain couldn't have been made before they showed up, because, you know, the fountain creation had to happen between Birdley and Noelle entering the computer lab and Susie and Chris arriving at the library.
Why?
So what's stage 2 of the Night Gang plan? You know how Queen brings up determination seemingly out of nowhere? Like, this isn't really readily available information to anyone, and she's just a random ass laptop. Really the only place she could have gotten it is from the Knight themselves. The goal here seems to be testing out how determination works. Specifically the determination of other lightness. That's why Birdley and Noelle were so directly targeted in this dark world. Queen is weirdly enamored with the idea of creating more dark fountains, but it's all just extrapolated from the actions of the Knight. I think there's some subconscious information involved, but either way testing determination and potentially testing fountain creation within Dark Worlds was the goal for the computer lab Dark Fountain. After all, the Queen didn't know about the roaring, so it's possible that the Night Gang doesn't know about it that explicitly either. Or they withheld that information from her, but then again the Knight had all the time in the world to start a roaring themselves. Closet 2, Return of the Dimensional Fuckery. Given all of these circumstances, the Knight had to hide in the closet and create the fountain from there in some way. At first I constructed this elaborate situation where the Knight pre-fountained in the closet to avoid making too much noise, because from what we've seen it's maybe not loud but at least attracts attention and takes like 15 seconds. So they fountained before Noelle and Birdley arrived and then opened the door to let the smoke envelop the room. But then I looked at the computer lab again, and what in the cable management is happening here? First of all, this seems like terrible IT practice. It basically screams for a Tales from Tech Support story of somebody unplugging the server to charge their smartwatch. But also that means you can't entirely close this door judging by the relative thickness of the cables and the way the socket is placed, somehow pre-firing my entire theory. To briefly return to my writing rant from the start, do you think this cable placement is unintentional? I have never in my life seen a server room with cables that lead outside of it in such an unprofessional way. No wonder the internet is down if this is the quality of IT servers Hometown is working with. I don't think Toby or the sprite artist for this room are too stupid to know how server rooms work, and I couldn't conceive of the levels of miscommunication possible for this spacious closet to unintentionally not have electric sockets inside. Like, you could remove these cables and everybody would reasonably assume that whatever device all the funny lights belong to is powered by a socket inside of the room, which we can't see, because it's dark inside. If these two cables didn't have some narrative reason, they would just be extra work with absolutely no point. Now, these cables do connect with some plugs hanging around in the early Cyber Dark world. They could specifically represent this long slope that transitions the blue person, green person, purple person gang onto the main area. For that we would have to posit that Chris and Susie start in the closet, which is a whole stretch in itself. We would then have to assume that when you enter a dark world it always places you in the darkest area first, and even then there's so many plugs and sockets in that closet area that this specific cable should still not be needed. Or it is meant to indicate something about the closet in the light world and how it pertains to the creation of fountains. This might be the stupidest rant I've ever gone on because, well, I still don't know what to do with all of this. All I know is that there's something to make of these closets in general. I was speculating for a while that they are what allows Rousey and the Knight to teleport between all of the dark world locations. It works great for chapter 1, 2 and 4, but in chapter 3 Rousey still manages to teleport to us quite quickly without any closet. You could say the Dreamer residence has a dark basement he could use, but then the Knight showing up so late doesn't make any sense anymore. The closets aren't explicitly drawn attention to throughout the story, but every time you take a somewhat closer look, something is weird about them. I just can't pinpoint what exactly it is yet. I don't know, man. At this point the video is more about closets than the Knight. Let's get back to that maybe. What did the Knight do if he couldn't hide the fountain creation? They obviously jumped out of the closet, but keeping in mind that Noelle and Birdley didn't notice the fountain beyond thinking they fell asleep, there's only two options. Number one, they actually just fell asleep before the fountain got made. Chris demonstrated pretty explicitly that you can make a fountain without waking up anyone around you. On the other hand, the time frame between us getting to the computer lab and the two nerds starting their study session is at most 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe a little more if you want to account for the abstraction of traveling in video games. That's kinda hard to believe, especially because it's Birdley and Noelle. Number 2, the Knight went to a fountain making bootcamp in the bunker overnight where they learned to very stealthily create fountains that don't make a crazy whoosh sound for 7 seconds and invert the lighting of the entire room. Maybe for this one it just felt like the room slightly got darker over time as smoke started filling the room. Truthfully, I don't like either of these options, but given the complete obliviousness to anything Darkwood related from Noelle and Birdley, I can't imagine it going any other way. Okay, to recap. The Knight created the second fountain in the computer lab while Birdley and Noelle were studying with the intent of having one of them, probably Noelle more than Birdley, create their own dark fountain. All that under the guise of testing the power of determination and possibly to find out what happens when a fountain is created while already in a dark world. Of course, none of that ended up happening, which could be one of the reasons Chris was the one to create the fountain at the end of chapter 2. That dark fountain would have happened eventually, but the events in the Cyber City Dark World could have led to a change of plans that then spiraled into the Knight ending up late to the party. Speaking of which, Chapter 3 is where things got serious. Chapter 1 and 2's testing phases from the Knight Gang were a low-stakes introduction phase to the world of Deltarune. They also worked perfectly as an exposition dumping tool, explaining important mechanics of its world. Now their plan gets properly set into motion. Unfortunately, it seems like the Knight Gang is off to a terrible start.
When?
Way too late, apparently. This is the one chapter where the Fun Gang is miles ahead of the Knight because they didn't make the fountain for once. Why the Knight is so delayed isn't known. Running from the Dreamer house to the bunker went very quickly after the confrontation, so that can't be it. Waiting for Undyne can't be the reason because, well, the Knight still showed up before her. And speculating anything outside of that is a baseless crapshoot, so I'll just leave it at the Knight was late. Because importantly, I think that's the reason we even get this Knight confrontation.
Why?
For a reason unknown at this point, just grabbing Toriel and booking it seems out of the question. Looking at Toriel in her queen outfit and on her throne, it's very likely that she has some kind of special powers in the Dark World. Hence the Knights and every other character's reluctance to wake her up. Instead we get the slow and careful beam that Susie obviously just interrupts. So the idea is to take out the fun club and then calmly tractor beam Toriel away. That's all going according to plan until Undyne shows up and we get this surprise pivot. So what's going on here? Why is the Knight fighting at all? Do they want to kidnap Tori? Why do they just take Undyne? They want Undyne to show up in the first place. Hold on. Fuck the timeline for a bit. Let's try to understand what the whole point behind this kidnapping business even is. For that we have to go back to the bunker security log. Let's start with asking the question of who is this log even for? The Knight Gang is already inside, they don't need the codes. We have all but explicit confirmation that the Knight and Chris have entered the bunker, along with descriptions of Carol visiting at some point in the past. Most of Hometown avoids the bunker like the plague. The only two characters that want to know what's inside the bunker are Susie and by extension us as the soul. And the thing is, the Knight Gang knows that. They are actively preventing us from learning Carol's code in the guitar, but protecting her code is the easy part because she possesses it. How would they prevent Susie from finding out the code of the other two code holders that presumably aren't involved in an insane conspiracy to plunge the world into darkness? You probably already know where I'm going with this, but just to lay it all out properly. The two leftover symbols, the Deltarune and the officer's badge, aren't 100% connected to any one character. But if we put together their strongest associations, look at the two characters who have been kidnapping targets so far, and add it to this motivation of keeping Susie out of the bunker, then you get a pretty good idea of what's going on here. Susie suspects as much herself when contemplating the symbols. Of course, she hasn't seen the door open for Chris at the end. It's not a crazy stretch to say that Toriel, someone heavily connected to the Deltarune symbol, and also targeted by kidnapping attempts, has the other code. I mean, come on, it's above her door, it's on the school she teaches in, and in the light world it is nowhere else to be found. Now I will acknowledge that if Undyne never got dragged into the bunker, we wouldn't be looking for those codes in the first place. But judging by this little phone call snippet, there is a police sacrifice happening at some point, which is probably the more significant reason for her kidnapping. What all that means is that both Toriel and Undyne were supposed to get abducted to the bunker. If the night wasn't late, they could have taken Toriel without even getting bothered by the fuck fan club, and then maybe still had time to pick up Undyne afterwards, since she was clearly planned to show up due to Chris slashing Toriel's tires. But because the night showed up so late, taking Toriel wasn't possible, and the backup plan was to just fly away with Undyne into the bunker. If this was any other video game, this series of events would be way too convoluted to ever be believable. But with the precedent Toby's writing has set so far, the general amount of insane unexplained shit Deltarune has presented, and the emphasis Chapter 3 has put on the night getting unexpectedly delayed, I could genuinely see things happening this way. How? For once we actually see the night doing the thing, so I don't have to infer anything based on minute details. The only unclear action that remains is why the night was so late, which I just have no clue about. With all of the bunker business cleared up, we can move on to Chapter 4. Again, the holiday sequence establishes relations between the characters that I've already gone over, so we'll skip right past it to... This is the last fountain we've seen so far, and in terms of night activity, the most puzzling when taken at face value. But under the pretense of the whole kidnapping idea, it resolves pretty quickly. Whenever choir practice was supposed to happen, probably right around the time Chris and Susie left the holiday residence.
Why?
It's not hard to figure out that the Dark Fountain creation was targeting Toriel once again. It was made in the place she was supposed to be, at the time she was supposed to be there. As one of the code knowers, code holders, code persons, code people, and a seemingly powerful entity in the Dark World, she's obviously still a major target for the Night Gang. I'd hazard a guess that the Night is relying on their coveted closet technique again, but the problem with that is that you're kinda doing it blindly. Once you jump out of that door, shit goes down, and if your target isn't actually in church, then you just made a Dark Fountain for essentially no reason. Which is exactly what happened here, and also informs some of the interactions in the upcoming Dark World. By the time Chris and Susie arrive at church, the Night has probably figured out that Toriel is nowhere to be found. So what now? Well, they just look around the Dark World and see what's going on. Like the fuck gang. Especially in this one, there's a whole lot to see because the usual fountain closing plotline takes a backseat to the prophecy. Now the Night Gang probably has a rough idea of the prophecy as it is part of Hometown's religion, but it is kind of just a story written down in a book. Like how the stories in the Bible didn't actually happen, but are rather treated as symbolic tales that are supposed to teach virtues and morals. So when those prophecy panels appear in the church Dark World, things get a little more real than just some letters in a book. Either way, the fun Lancer squad follows the Night across Chapter 4, and they're just trying to get rid of us, probably in an effort to prevent us from closing the Dark Fountains as always. It's kinda unclear how much the Night cares about the Dark World staying open. If they really wanted to, they could have stood in front of each fountain since Chapter 1, making it impossible to close them. Which honestly just reinforces the fact that they're open for these very specific purposes of testing stuff. So what's something the Night didn't get to test yet? Oh yeah, the whole fountain in a fountain business. Since this Dark World is a wash anyways, the Night Gang might as well catch up on what they narrowly missed out on Chapter 2 and see what happens if you summon a Titan. Also doubles as a great getaway tool, and we now know that the Soul can even seal a Titan. And that's all of the Night appearances so far. I do think the Night Gang is done testing now. As I said earlier, the whole thing is really just an exposition tool. It lets Rycia explain important mechanics of this world to Susie and us as the player at more natural points in the story. Like that, the stakes gradually rise as the story goes on and we learn more about the world. It wouldn't work so well if we met Rycia in Castletown, He exposition dumps us for an entire hour about Dark Worlds, the roaring, the inevitability of the prophecy, and right after that the knight jumps in and summons an entire titan.
So what's endgame?
The Night King isn't just testing shit out for the sake of it, there's gotta be a distinct goal they're trying to get to. With all of the themes of nostalgia, preservation, and people staying in the past, it's probably still to bring back death, or at least turning them into a personable form. At the risk of calling Toby a sly fox who's telling the same story again, it could end up looking like Flowey turning back to Asriel. There is a sacrifice happening after all, it's very likely that all of that is a soul-related thing. If that whole process includes retrieving her soul from the code, then that is probably also where the Night plot intersects with Gaster. The intricacies of that process are pretty unknown, but Deltarune makes some allusions to it already by using the numbers 1, 2, 2, 5 as a symbolic stand-in for death, her name being December holiday. The most prominent holiday in December being on the 25th, at least in English-speaking countries. Specifically, every time the sequence of numbers has shown up, it acts as an access code to another area. In Chapter 3, it allows you to access the snowy place where Toriel is located, and the night confrontation happens. It is also the TV parental lock code for the Dreamer residence that was put in place because of death, letting you subtextually access memories associated with her. The code inside of the guitar in Chapter 4 that at least contains 1225 lets you make progress towards accessing the bunker, the one place we know the night is inhabiting. And of course the Gacha machine code that transports you to the Hand Begone dimension. This one isn't really as cut and dry, but we get a lot of thematic connections with the Lost Girl theme. A small, dark triangle heart-like lacquer being strangely reminiscent of the knight's characteristics, and of course shadow crystals. All of that culminates in your hand disappearing, and this is not the first time Deltarune has put shadow crystals and hands together. It already cannonballs you in Chapter 1 with what might be one of the most cryptic sentences in the entire game, which happens when you check the shadow crystal in your inventory. A sharp shadow moves like water in the hand. At first I didn't think I read that right, but it is water moving in the hand, not the other way around. For one, this little phrase somehow crams every bit of obscure Deltarune imagery into just 9 words. Shadows as in darkness, water as in the depths and all of the ice related stuff, sharp maybe associating glass and coldness, and then the hands drifting forwards. Second of all, water in the hand, like blood? Then we have hands disappearing when looking through the shadow crystals themselves. All of these descriptions of the knight's hand, just hands anywhere, seriously, there's so much of it. Chris trying to wash the hands of something to no avail, of course the connection to Gaster's whole hands, the man who talks in hands, wingdings and the egg. This is in a way like the closet, stuff you can just walk past and never think about, but when you look a little closer it's in all kinds of places, and undoubtedly meaningful. Symbolically, hands can mean so many things, and almost all of them align with Deltarune's established themes already. From divine intervention and power, creation and connecting to the cosmos, or identity and emotional self-expression. I think most of the time Deltarune uses the hand as a symbol of creation, whether it be painting or writing stories. For Chris specifically, it applies more to their self-expression and identity, and themes like divine intervention or the cosmos are more reserved for the big G-man. That all comes back to getting lost in fiction, of course, dealing with reality and accepting that you can't permanently wish yourself away into a different world. Something that so many characters in Deltarune are actively struggling with. Chris avoiding their family struggles, Susie avoiding her social problems, Noelle escaping from her father's illness, Carol trying to revert Daz's disappearance, Asgore trying to repair his family and standing in the town, or Alvin digging up his father. A sharp shadow moves like water in the hand. This one sentence feels like the thesis statement to Deltarune's undertones and thematic support. The inevitable intersection between Chris's struggle with our possession, the Roaring Knight absolutely roaring it, and by it I mean the end of the world, whatever Noelle and the secret bosses are up to, and Gaster's obsession with the prophecy. But Deltarune doesn't only throw straight foreshadowing at you. There's more than ominous grave digging or Chekhov's hospitalized deer being set up. It has slowly been building up to expressing its major themes since the very beginning. Deltarune's very first Dark World hits us with this desolate, dread-inducing wasteland that I've been obsessed with since first seeing it. The eyes, the foreboding faces that might as well be following you, the massive slanting pillars in the back. Piles of, well, actually, is this dust? I always thought of this as foam or bubbles in some way. Not to forget the glass, these little bobbly things, and of course the darkness all of it is shrouded in. We've only had 2 areas like this so far, one in the closet and one in the Dreamer residence. They feel like dark worlds entirely stripped of their identity, before being imbued with the lightness memories and darkness energy. They also very much resemble the central statement formed around shadow crystals. Around losing your creativity and self-expression, only leaving a vast wasteland and looking into a world where you've stopped impacting other people's lives. These areas will come back, and the next time they do, it will probably end up being a lot more eventful. Toby's writing has so many setups, foreshadowing, blips, and references that you can easily get lost in mistaking everything as a future premonition. Like, yeah, Chris could lose their hand, but honestly that seems a little too specifically graphic. Isn't it more likely that losing your hand ends up being a metaphor for Chris losing agency over themselves? Something that's already in progress throughout the entire game? I think shadows, water, hands, ice, blood, darkness, light, and what else have you are the glue to Deltarune's story. We're not gonna be able to pinpoint when the roaring starts or who is responsible for Death's disappearance by analyzing it, but they help draw parallels and really bring Deltarune together as a cohesive narrative. That's not to say we shouldn't be looking into it, it's fun to pick apart and draw those exact parallels. At the same time though, we should be picking apart what is narrative setup and what is symbolic imagery to support the story. Like Alvin talking about his father's hammer in chapter 2 was set up for the old man's appearance in chapter 4. Or Toriel being shown as a literal queen in chapter 3 will definitely come back in future chapters. On the other hand, these eyes and crazy stone pillars that I've been obsessed with for forever are very unlikely to foreshadow any specific event, or anything at all. And maybe that's exactly why I'm so obsessed with them. But they will show up again, and they do mean something. Probably relating to the Titans and the Roaring. Their purpose is rather to convey that eeriness and impending doom you get from thinking about an event like the Roaring. While Deltarune has this extremely story-focused structure that makes it so appealing to put different pieces together and transform them into your own crazy narrative, it isn't just a puzzle with a solution to find. Sometimes you're just supposed to absorb the imagery and have it elevate the rest of the story instead of looking for missing limbs in extremely obscure text boxes. Or Chris will lose their hand, go blind from the darkness, all their bones will shatter like glass, and they end up a mangled corpse by the end of the game. Whatever you want to believe in, don't let me stop you.